I'm 34M, and my wife Sarah 32F, and I recently adopted a 5-year-old girl, Lily, after years of struggling with infertility. We had tried everything, treatments, specialists, even looking into surrogacy, but nothing worked. When we finally made the decision to adopt, it felt like fate. The moment we met Lily, we knew she was our daughter. Bringing her home was one of the happiest days of our lives. Sarah decorated her room with soft pinks and fairy lights, and we spent hours introducing her to our world. Every morning, Lily would wake up with the biggest smile, excited to start the day. She was adjusting so well, and we couldn't wait to introduce her to our families. We started with Sarah's side. The moment they met Lily, they embraced her without hesitation. Her parents showered her with love. Her siblings treated her like she had always been part of the family, and within days she was already calling Sarah's mom grandma like it was the most natural thing in the world. Then it was time for my family. That's when things went south. I called my parents first, excitedly telling them that we wanted them to meet their granddaughter. My mom hesitated for a second before saying she and my dad were busy that weekend. I asked about the next weekend, also busy. The weekend after that, no real answer. Just vague excuses about plans and needing time. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe they needed a moment to adjust. Maybe the idea of me adopting a child had caught them off guard. My brother 36M and my sister 30F weren't much better. They brushed off the invite, saying they'd try to swing by sometime. Weeks passed and still, nothing. No visits, no calls asking about Lily, not even a simple "how's she settling in?" Sarah kept checking the front door like she was expecting someone to show up. Nothing. I pushed again, asking them directly when they were going to come meet her. That's when the truth came out. My mom sighed like I was exhausting her and finally said, "We just don't feel a connection. She's not really ours, you know." I froze. She kept talking, saying it wasn't personal, but that blood matters and that she and my dad didn't see Lily as their real granddaughter. I could barely process what I was hearing. When I pressed her, she doubled down. "She's not actually your daughter, OP," she said, like it was some obvious fact I was too blind to see. I didn't say a word. I just hung up. I thought my siblings would be different. Maybe they'd talk some sense into our parents. But when I confronted them, my brother shrugged it off. My sister, who had 2 kids of her own, awkwardly told me, "It's just different. You have to understand where mom and dad are coming from." Understand? Understand what? That my daughter wasn't good enough for them. That they were willing to pretend she didn't exist just because she didn't share our DNA? That was the moment I made my decision. If they couldn't accept Lily, then they didn't deserve to be in our lives. I told them exactly that. My mom scoffed and called me dramatic. My dad barely said anything. My brother mumbled something about me being too sensitive. Sarah sat beside me on the couch that night, holding Lily in her lap as she played with a stuffed bunny. She had heard everything. "Maybe we should stop trying," she said softly. "I don't want her to grow up feeling like she's unwanted." I looked at Lily, completely unaware of the cruel rejection from the people who were supposed to love her. Sarah was right. We had done everything we could. If they didn't want to be part of our daughter's life, that was their choice. But I wasn't going to let them pretend to be her grandparents when it was convenient for them. I sent one last invitation. Lily's 6th birthday was coming up, and I figured it was one last chance for them to step up. A simple invite. No pressure, just an opportunity to do the right thing. My mom's response came almost immediately. "You know we don't see her as our grandchild. Why would we come? We'll celebrate birthdays when you have a real child." That was it. I was done. I blocked them from everything. Family group chat, gone. Social media, removed. I didn't owe them another second of my time. Sarah and I threw Lily the best birthday party we could. Sarah's family came, Lily's new friends came, even some of our neighbors joined in. There were balloons, cake, presents, and laughter. She ran around the backyard, giggling, her curls bouncing as she played with the other kids. At one point she ran up to me, arms wide. "Daddy, this is the best day ever." I picked her up, spinning her around. "You deserve it, sweetheart." My parents didn't send a text. No call, nothing. It was like we had been erased from their lives. Fine by me, because if they didn't want Lily, then they sure as hell weren't going to get me either. But I wasn't done yet. If they thought I was just going to fade away quietly, they had another thing coming. This was just the beginning. The moment I cut them off, the silence was deafening. No texts, no calls, no last-minute attempts to fix things. It was like my family had decided that since I wouldn't play by their rules, I no longer existed. I removed them from the family group chat. My phone stayed quiet. Sarah did the same on her end. It was like flipping a switch. 1 second, we were trying to force a relationship that would never happen, and the next we were done. But that didn't mean they were. A few days later, an email popped up in my inbox. My mother, a long dramatic letter about how I was ripping the family apart, and how family should always come first. She threw in phrases like, "You'll regret this one day and we just wanted what was best for you." I didn't reply. A week later, another email, same thing, just reworded. This time, she added a passive-aggressive line about how she and my dad had prayed for us to have a child of our own, and how she hoped God would give us that blessing someday. Deleted. Then came Christmas. Our first Christmas as a family of 3. We went all out. A tree decorated with twinkling lights, stockings with our names on them, a fireplace playing on the TV since we didn't have a real one. Sarah and I wrapped every gift with care, making sure Lily would have the most magical morning possible, and she did. She tore into her presents, her eyes wide with excitement as she unwrapped dolls, puzzles, and a tiny pink bicycle with training wheels. Sarah's parents came over later, bringing even more gifts. And by the end of the day, Lily was curled up on the couch in a new set of pajamas, holding onto a stuffed bear she named Mr. Cuddles. Not a single call or text from my family. No card in the mail. Nothing. It wasn't until New Year's that I found out why. A cousin on my dad's side reached out. Not someone I was particularly close to, but she had always been decent. She messaged me out of the blue, saying she'd heard about what happened, and wanted me to know she didn't agree with any of it. That's when I found out what my mother had been telling people. According to her, I was forcing the family to accept a stranger's child and demanding they fake love for someone they had no connection to. She painted herself as the victim, the poor mother being punished for having a different opinion. I saw red. I wasn't going to let her control the story. That night, I sat down and typed out a post. Not a rant, not an attack, just the truth. I talked about Lily, how she came into our lives, how she had the biggest heart, how she loved to dance in the kitchen while we made dinner, how she had already started calling me daddy after just a few months. I ended it with a simple statement: family isn't about blood, it's about love. It wasn't some viral sensation, but people saw it, people who mattered. Within hours, the comments started rolling in. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years were reaching out, shocked at what my parents had done. Some offered support. Others flat out called my mom disgusting. Then came the phone call. My mom furious, yelling about airing family business and how I had turned people against her. I didn't argue. I didn't even raise my voice. I just said, if you don't want people to know what you did, maybe you shouldn't have done it. Then I hung up. The next day, my sister called. I ignored it at first, but she kept trying. Eventually I answered. She started in immediately. Mom is upset. This has gone too far. You need to apologize. I asked her one thing. Would you be okay if someone treated your kids like this? Silence. Then a sigh. You just need to respect their views. Blocked. The next time my phone rang, it was my dad. Not to yell, not to fight, just to smooth things over. He acted like this was all some big misunderstanding, like maybe if I just gave it time, everything would work itself out. I asked him something simple. How would you feel if someone refused to acknowledge me as your son? He hesitated. Then, that's different. That was all I needed to hear. Sarah and I moved forward. No more chasing after people who didn't want to be in our lives. No more waiting for my family to magically change their minds. Instead of arguing, I focused on making sure Lily knew she was loved, that she had a home where she was wanted. My parents didn't break me. They didn't make me second-guess my choices. They just made themselves irrelevant. And as far as I was concerned, they could stay that way. A year had passed since Lily officially became our daughter. Sarah and I wanted to celebrate, really celebrate. She had come so far from the shy, uncertain girl who first stepped into our home. Now, she ran around laughing, filling every room with her energy. She deserved a day that was all about her. So we threw a huge adoption anniversary party. We rented out a small event space, decorated it with pink and gold balloons, and set up a table covered in cupcakes and presents. Sarah's parents were there, of course, along with close friends and extended family who had supported us from the start. My parents and siblings weren't invited. Word got around fast. A few aunts and uncles asked why my parents weren't coming. I didn't sugarcoat it. I told them straight up. They don't see Lily as family. I don't see the point in inviting people who refuse to acknowledge my daughter. Some nodded, understanding. Others shifted uncomfortably, mumbling things like maybe you should just let it go, or they're old-fashioned, give them time. I wasn't interested in giving more time to people who had made their stance very clear. The party was perfect. Lily was surrounded by love. She laughed with her friends, danced to her favorite songs, and opened gifts while sitting in Sarah's lap. At one point, one of Sarah's uncles lifted Lily onto his shoulders, parading her around as everyone cheered. That moment stuck with me. It should have been my father doing that. I posted a few pictures online later that night. Nothing dramatic, just a collection of happy memories. The caption was simple. 1 year since we officially became a family. Lily, you are so loved. Family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up. Within an hour, my mom texted me. Why weren't we invited? I didn't bother pretending to be polite. You said she's not your granddaughter, so why would you come? No response. A few minutes later, my dad called. His voice was quieter than usual. He said they could have handled things differently, and maybe they overreacted. It wasn't an apology, just a weak attempt at damage control. I asked him if they were ready to accept Lily as their granddaughter. Silence. Then, it's complicated. I hung up. Not long after that, my sister reached out. She hadn't spoken to me since I blocked her months ago, but suddenly she wanted to stop by for a few minutes to see Lily. I shut that down immediately. You had a year to meet her. You chose not to. She tried arguing that it wasn't the same, and she just needed time to process everything. I told her time was up. That's when my mom took things public. A vague Facebook post. It's heartbreaking when family turns on you. Some people take things too far. She must have thought she was going to get sympathy. Instead, people started calling her out. A couple of mutual friends asked, "Why haven't you met your granddaughter yet?" Another relative chimed in, "How is this too far when you refuse to meet her?" She deleted the post within an hour. That night, my phone rang again. This time, it was my mom, demanding that I fix the misunderstanding. She acted like the real problem was the family turning against her, not the fact that she and my dad had spent a year pretending Lily didn't exist. I refused. Sarah took it a step further. She sent a single text to my parents. "If you ever want to meet Lily, you need to accept her fully. No half measures. No treating her like she doesn't count. You either love her, or you stay out of her life." Radio silence. But cracks were forming. A cousin reached out later that week. She let me in on something interesting. My parents were privately admitting they might have gone too far. Not to me, of course. Not to Sarah, but to other family members. Their pride wouldn't let them backtrack, but they were losing control of the narrative. They wanted to be the victims in this. They wanted people to pity them. Instead, they were the ones being questioned. And I could tell this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Weeks passed without a word from my parents. No passive-aggressive texts. No vague social media posts. Nothing. It was the longest they had gone without trying to control the situation. I figured they had finally given up. Then my dad called. Not a text. Not an email. A direct call. He asked if we could meet in person, just to talk. He didn't sound angry, just tired. I didn't agree right away. I told him I'd think about it. Sarah didn't say much, just nodded when I told her. She knew I wasn't expecting anything to change. A few days later, I met them at a coffee shop. My dad was already sitting when I arrived. My mom was next to him, arms crossed, expression stiff. She didn't look at me when I sat down. The moment I was settled, my dad started talking. They didn't mean to hurt anyone. They weren't ready. They needed more time to process everything. I let him talk. Then, when he finally stopped, I asked one question. "How much more time do you need?" No answer. I reminded him that Lily had been with us for over a year, that they had been given plenty of chances, that every missed call, every ignored invite, every time they chose their own pride over their granddaughter had been their decision. That's when my mom finally spoke. She scoffed, shook her head. "It's just not the same as having a real grandchild." There it was. No hesitation, no guilt, just a statement of fact, like I was supposed to accept it. I stood up. Neither of them tried to stop me. An hour later, my mom sent a text. "You're tearing this family apart over a girl who isn't even blood." I didn't respond. That same night, my aunt, my mom's own sister, messaged me. She had heard about the meeting, about what my mom said, and she was disgusted. She asked if she could meet Lily. I sent her our address. A few days later, she came over. She brought gifts, a stuffed animal, a book, a little charm bracelet. Nothing expensive, just things that showed she cared. Lily, being Lily, welcomed her instantly. Within minutes, she was showing her pictures she had drawn, talking about her favorite cartoons. That's when the shift started. One by one, other family members reached out. A cousin messaged me, asking if the rumors were true, that my parents had refused to meet Lily. I told them everything. Then another cousin reached out. Then an uncle. Then a second aunt. The more people heard, the more they saw the truth. My mom must have realized what was happening, because suddenly, she was back on damage control. She started calling family members, spinning the story her way. "We just needed time. It's not that we don't love Lily. It's just different. We never said she wasn't family. It's all just a misunderstanding." It didn't work. By the time she started panicking, it was too late. Sarah and I hosted a small family gathering, just for the relatives who had actually shown up for us. Lily ran around the backyard, laughing, playing with kids she had never met before but already called her cousins. My aunt sat next to me at one point, watching Lily with a soft smile. "She's wonderful," she said. "I don't know how anyone could look at her and not see family." Neither did I. That night, after everyone left, I checked my phone. Another message from my mom. "I can't believe what you're doing. You're turning everyone against us." No, they had done that themselves. Sarah and I talked later that evening. We knew my parents weren't going to change unless they had to. Unless the pressure became too much. It was time to force their hand. We had the perfect plan, and it was only just getting started. A few weeks after the fallout with my parents, an invitation arrived in the mail. The annual family reunion. It was a big event, something that had been happening for decades. Every year my parents attended without fail, using it as a chance to play the role of the perfect family in front of extended relatives. Sarah and I looked at the invite and immediately knew what we had to do. We were bringing Lily. Word spread fast. A few cousins reached out, excited to finally meet Lily in person. A couple of aunts texted Sarah, saying how happy they were that we were coming. From my parents. Silence. The day of the reunion, we walked into the venue, a rented banquet hall that had been decorated with blue and gold banners. A long buffet table stretched along one side of the room, and family members milled about, catching up and laughing. The moment we stepped inside, conversations slowed. People glanced at us, then at my parents, waiting to see their reaction. My mom sat at a table near the center of the room, her back stiff, her expression unreadable. My dad looked away, pretending to be focused on his drink. Lily, completely unaware of the tension, took Sarah's hand and skipped forward, her curls bouncing as she took in the room, and just like that she won everyone over. Within minutes she was running around with the other kids, giggling as she played tag. One of my cousins lifted her up and spun her around, making her squeal with laughter. A group of aunts gathered near Sarah, showering Lily with compliments. She's beautiful. She looks so happy. I can't believe this is the first time we're meeting her. My mom didn't move. She stayed seated, her jaw tight. My dad avoided looking in our direction. It didn't take long before someone finally spoke up. A cousin, loud enough for half the room to hear, looked at my mom and asked, "Aren't you going to spend time with your granddaughter?" My mom's lips thinned. Then, in a voice colder than ice, she said, "I don't know what you're talking about." Silence. The tension in the room shifted. A few people looked at her in shock. Others whispered to each other. Then, my aunt, the same one who had reached out to meet Lily, walked over, knelt beside Lily and smiled. "If you ever want a grandma, sweetheart, I'd love to be one for you." Lily grinned and nodded without hesitation. Across the room, my mom's face turned red. A few minutes later, it was time for the big family photo. Every year, we took a massive group picture, with grandparents in the center, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. This time, Lily was front and center, sitting happily in Sarah's lap. As soon as the camera flashed, my mom abruptly stood up and left the room. My dad hesitated for a moment, then quietly followed her out. Nobody ran after them. An hour later, my phone buzzed. A text from my mom. "I can't believe you paraded her around like that. Do you enjoy embarrassing us?" I didn't even hesitate before replying. "You embarrassed yourselves." That was it. That was the moment they lost whatever little control they thought they still had. Over the next few days, more and more family members took sides. Some, mostly my parents' closest friends and a handful of older relatives, tried to defend them, saying things like they just need more time. This has been hard on them, but the majority weren't buying it anymore. One uncle called my dad and flat out told him he was being ridiculous. A cousin posted pictures from the reunion, including the one with Lily in the family photo, captioned with "Welcome to the family." Lily. The next step was obvious. Sarah suggested we send out formal invitations for Lily's next adoption anniversary party. But this time we wouldn't just invite the people who supported us. We'd invite everyone, including my parents. They had a choice now: show up, acknowledge Lily, and finally step up as grandparents, or refuse, and let the whole family see exactly where they stood. The invitations went out. Now all we had to do was wait. The moment the invitations went out, I knew it wouldn't take long for my mom to react. It came the next morning. My phone lit up with an incoming call. Her name flashed across the screen. I let it ring a few times before picking up. She didn't waste time. She wanted to know why they were invited when I knew how they felt. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just told her plainly, "This is your last chance to be in our lives." Silence. Then she scoffed. She knew what I was doing apparently. She accused me of setting her up, of trying to force her into something she wasn't comfortable with. Then in the background, I heard my dad, "Maybe we should just go." My mom snapped at him. "Absolutely not." That was the first crack. Over the next few days, family members started confirming their attendance. Cousins, aunts, uncles, people we hadn't seen in a while reached out excited to celebrate Lily. It didn't take long before my parents realized they couldn't decline without looking really bad. The pressure mounted when a distant cousin shared one of my social media posts. It was a simple caption: "True family isn't about blood, it's about who shows up." The post started gaining traction in our family circle. People commented, liked, shared it. It was subtle, but the message was clear. My parents were losing ground. A few days later, another text from my mom: "Fine, we'll come, but we don't want a big scene." She wanted control. She wanted to set the terms. I wasn't going to let that happen. I responded, "If you come, you act like real grandparents. No weird behavior. No cold shoulders. You're either in or out." Radio silence. For days, nothing. I figured they weren't coming. Honestly, I wasn't surprised. Then the day of the party arrived. It was perfect. Lily was surrounded by love, laughing, playing, running around with her cousins. The backyard was filled with balloons, a big Adoption Day banner hung above the patio, and tables were covered with food. Sarah's parents were there, smiling as they watched Lily open presents. She was happy. That was all that mattered. Then near the end of the night, someone stepped into the yard. My dad, alone. I hadn't expected it. For a second, I just stared. Then he walked toward me, hands in his pockets. He pulled me aside, away from the crowd. His voice was quiet. He didn't agree with everything, but he didn't want to lose me. I looked at him and said, "Then accept my daughter." He hesitated, glancing over at Lily. Then he admitted something. My mom had refused to come. Not only that, she had threatened to leave him, if he did. I sighed. It wasn't surprising, but hearing it out loud made it real. Then, before I could say anything else, A small voice cut through the moment. Grandpa, Lily had spotted him. She ran up, stopping just short, looking up at him with wide eyes. There was no hesitation, no doubt in her face, just excitement. For a second, he didn't move. Then slowly he knelt down. She threw her arms around his neck. He froze. Then finally, he hugged her back. Sarah had been watching from a distance. I caught her wiping her eyes. My dad whispered, just barely loud enough for me to hear. She reminds me of you when you were little. And in that moment, I knew the wall was starting to break. I didn't push. I didn't try to force anything. I just told him, you're welcome in our lives. But if mom wants back in, she apologizes first. He nodded, looking conflicted. This wasn't over. But for the first time it was clear. My parents no longer controlled the story. And my dad. He was finally starting to see Lily. The aftermath of the adoption party was inevitable. My dad left early, looking conflicted. He'd spent most of the night in the background, watching from the sidelines, but there had been moments where he seemed to soften, moments when he really looked at Lily. Still, I knew a storm was coming. The next morning, I woke up to a text from my mom. You've turned my own husband against me. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Later that day, my phone rang. It was my dad. I didn't pick up at first, but he called again a few minutes later. When I answered, he didn't waste time. He admitted that he and my mom had a huge fight after the party. She'd accused him of betraying the family, of choosing me over her. He didn't try to explain. He just sounded tired. Then he dropped the bomb. My mom had given him an ultimatum. Either cut OP and Lily out, or I'm leaving. It didn't shock me. I knew she was that stubborn, that controlling. But the weight of it hit me harder than I expected. She was willing to break up her marriage over this. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, my phone rang again. This time, it was my sister. She was furious. She blamed me for ruining the family, saying I was forcing my parents to choose between me and them. It didn't take long for my brother to join in. They both shouted at me, accusing me of being selfish. I didn't even get a word in before my sister said, Lily will never really be part of this family. That was it. I hung up. Done. But the phone calls didn't stop. My phone was buzzing non-stop with relatives from both sides of the family. It was clear the storm was far bigger than I had anticipated. More and more aunts, uncles, and cousins reached out, not to side with my parents, but to tell me how disappointed they were in them. Some of them even said they were considering cutting my parents off completely. My mom's social standing started to crumble too. She couldn't hide her behavior from the outside world anymore. At church, people started asking questions, whispering about what had happened. A few of the church members had heard about the party and sided with me. Others, though, were still loyal to my mom. But the cracks were showing, and my mom knew it. Then something unexpected happened. My dad called me again, this time sounding a little more hopeful. He asked if he could take Lily out for ice cream, just the two of them. I hesitated. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I agreed. It felt like a small victory when my dad started making the effort to spend time with Lily on his own. It wasn't much, but it was progress. When they came back a couple of hours later, Lily was practically glowing. She ran up to me, excitedly calling her grandfather so fun. My dad had even bought her a giant sundae with extra whipped cream, which she proudly showed off. It was simple. It was innocent, and it made me realize that maybe, just maybe, my dad was starting to soften. But then my mom texted again. If you want to fix this family, you know what you have to do. I looked at the message for a long moment. I knew exactly what she was asking for. Me to back down, to apologize for everything, to fall in line with her plans. I typed out my response carefully. The family is already fixing itself. You're the only one left out. I sent it. Then I sat back and waited for the fallout. I wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but I knew it was the last thing I would say to my mom until she took responsibility for her actions. It was clear now, my parents had been trying to control everything for far too long, and they weren't going to win this one. The family was changing, whether they liked it or not. Over the next few weeks, my dad started showing up more often. At first, it was just little visits here and there, taking Lily out for ice cream, spending time in the backyard, talking about old family stories. But those visits began to stretch into longer, more frequent hangouts. Lily, of course, loved it. She would run to the door when she saw his car pull up, excitedly shouting, "Grandpa's here." It was a simple joy, one that my dad seemed to treasure more than anything. I could see it in the way he looked at her, like he was making up for lost time, like he was realizing what he'd missed out on all these years. But my mom's response was the complete opposite. My sister called me one night, practically in tears. She told me, "Mom cries every night now. She says she's lost her family. She says you've turned everyone against her." I didn't say much. I wasn't moved. I knew exactly what my mom was doing. This wasn't some heartfelt sobbing. This was manipulation. Meanwhile, more people in our church community started reaching out to me, gently questioning why my mom was shutting out her own granddaughter. Some of them didn't outright say it, but it was obvious they were putting the pressure on her, whether she realized it or not. Word got around, and it didn't help my mom's image. The more people criticized her, the more she dug in her heels. She started telling people I had brainwashed my dad, twisting the narrative to make herself look like the victim. Of course, no one bought it. I guess she underestimated just how well everyone knew her. Then one evening, my dad showed up at my door. He looked drained, like he hadn't slept in days. I asked him what was wrong, and he just sighed. "I need time away from your mother," he said quietly. I stared at him, not sure if I was hearing him correctly. "What do you mean? I can't keep living like this," he continued. "I need to clear my head. I need space." I had no idea how to respond. It wasn't like he had ever asked for space before, but I knew it wasn't just a phase he was going through. The tension at home had been unbearable for both of them. A week later, I got a call from one of my uncles. My dad had moved in with him, temporarily, to get away from the constant fighting at home. I didn't blame him. Then came the call I was half expecting, but still wasn't ready for. My sister again, this time sounding frantic. "Mom is inconsolable," she said. "She's blaming you for everything. She says you've destroyed their marriage." I let her talk for a few seconds, then responded. "She did this to herself. She's the one who pushed us all away." My sister was silent for a long time before admitting, "I know, but she's not handling this well, and it's only getting worse." That was the breaking point for my brother. Until now, he had been neutral, staying out of the drama. But after seeing my mom's meltdown firsthand, he finally admitted, "Mom's acting crazy." I didn't bother arguing. The truth was becoming undeniable to everyone. A few days later, my mom called me directly. This time, she wasn't angry. She was crying. "I just don't know how to change," she sobbed. "I don't know what to do. I never wanted to lose my family." It was hard to even listen to her. I knew it wasn't an apology, and I knew it wasn't genuine, but I had heard enough. "Just show up," I told her flatly. "That's all you need to do. Just show up. Accept her as your granddaughter. No more excuses." There was a pause on the other end of the line before she whispered, "Okay." I wasn't sure what exactly okay meant, but I didn't press it. Then, a few days later, I got the text I never thought I'd see. "Can I meet her?" It was simple, direct, almost too easy. I stared at it for a minute, unsure how to process it. After everything, her refusal to acknowledge Lily, the fights, the endless drama, she was asking to meet her. I had a million questions, but I didn't overthink it. I quickly replied, "Only if you accept her fully." No weird comments, no hesitation. She didn't respond right away, but I knew she had gotten the message. The next evening we prepared for the meeting. Sarah, Lily, and I waited anxiously at the kitchen table. The air was thick with tension. Then the doorbell rang. I opened it, and there she was, my mom, standing in front of me, with an uncertain look on her face. It was as if she didn't know whether she was walking into a battlefield or a peace treaty. "Hi," I said flatly, not sure how to greet her. She stepped in, her eyes darting around the house like she was a stranger in her own son's home. Lily came bounding down the hall, her little feet running as she reached the doorway. She stopped, staring at my mom for a moment, then beamed brightly and said, "Hi, Grandma." It was an innocent, pure moment. Lily didn't know the history. She didn't care. She was just excited to meet her new grandmother. I watched my mom's face. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, after what felt like forever, her voice shook. "Hi, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice barely audible. It wasn't much, but it was something. A cracked wall, a tiny step forward. I knew this wasn't over. I wasn't delusional enough to think that everything would be perfect now. But for the first time, my mom had acknowledged Lily, and that meant something. A small victory, but a victory nonetheless. The next few weeks were a strange mix of slow progress and awkward moments. My mom visited us a couple more times after that first meeting with Lily. Each time, the tension was palpable. She'd hover by the door, hesitant, unsure of how to interact with her granddaughter. Lily, bless her heart, would always smile and offer a friendly greeting, but I could see that my mom didn't know how to respond. There was an awkward silence that hung between them. My mom's eyes would dart around the room, not quite sure where to look. And Lily, as sweet as she was, kept trying to draw her in with questions about her childhood or little games. My mom would smile, but it always felt forced. It was clear she wasn't sure how to navigate this new territory. But as the visits continued, something started to shift. Lily, with her boundless energy and kindness, kept pushing through my mom's walls. One day, Lily handed my mom a drawing she had made. Something simple, just a picture of the two of them holding hands in a garden. It was a gesture of pure innocence, nothing complicated. And to my surprise, my mom looked at it for a long moment before she gently placed it on the table and said, "That's very nice, sweetheart." It wasn't much, but it was a start. A few weeks later, my mom surprised me. One evening, she came to our house with an old family photo album. It was a little worn around the edges, the kind of album that had sat on a shelf for years, gathering dust, but when I opened it, I couldn't believe what I saw. She had taken the time to add a few new pictures. Pictures of Lily and me, photos from the birthday party and from our days at the park. She hadn't just added them in a corner either. She'd placed them right next to the older family photos. It was her first real attempt to bring Lily into the family narrative, to make her part of the history. I didn't know what to say. For a second, I thought I was imagining it, but there they were. Lily's smiling face, tucked between old photos of me as a kid. That was the turning point. Not long after, my dad came back home. He'd been living with my uncle for weeks, but he came by one evening and told me and Sarah that he and my mom had reconciled. It hadn't been easy, he said, but they had finally sat down and talked things through. And then he looked me square in the eye and said, "Lily is part of this family." No debate. I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. For the first time in a long while, my dad was standing firm. There was no more questioning, no more uncertainty. He had made it clear to my mom that Lily was as much a part of the family as anyone else. Then came something I never expected. My mom's apology. It was late one evening when she called. She was quiet, a little shaky. She asked if I could come over, and when I arrived, she was waiting for me by the kitchen table, her hands folded in front of her. "I was wrong," she said, looking up at me. "I hurt you. I hurt Lily. I see that now." I almost didn't believe it, but there it was, her admission. She didn't try to justify it or make excuses. She just owned it. We didn't get into the details, but it didn't matter. The words alone meant everything. At the next family gathering, my mom did something I never thought I'd see. She stood up in front of everyone, smiled at Lily and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "This is my granddaughter." For a moment there was silence. Some people actually gasped. They couldn't believe it. My mom, who had once refused to even acknowledge Lily's existence, was now proudly introducing her to the family. My sister, of course, wasn't having any of it. She didn't say anything, but I could tell she was fuming. She refused to engage, sitting in the corner and pretending like nothing had changed. I didn't care. Watching my mom dote on Lily, brushing her hair, helping her with her clothes, calling her my little sunshine, it was surreal. It was the ultimate revenge. This was the woman who had once refused to meet my daughter, and now she was showering her with affection. I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of justice. Later, my mom pulled me aside. She looked at me with a kind of vulnerability I hadn't seen in years. "I was scared," she admitted. "Scared of change. Scared of what people would think. Scared of being wrong. But Lily, she changed me." I didn't know what to say. It was a lot to take in, and part of me still wasn't sure if this was real, or just a momentary shift. But I could tell she meant it. Of course my sister and brother were still bitter. My sister didn't want to accept that I had won, whatever that meant to her. She didn't speak to me for weeks, and my brother remained distant, offering only half-hearted responses when I tried to reach out. But at this point, I didn't care anymore. The most important thing was that my mom had finally come around. Then came the biggest step of all. My mom asked if she could take Lily on a grandma-granddaughter day, just the two of them. It was huge. Sarah and I agreed, and I watched as they walked out the door, hand in hand, both of them smiling. It was a moment I had always dreamed of, but never thought I'd see. Lily had no idea about all the drama, all the years of pain and rejection. All she knew was that she had a grandma who loved her. A few weeks later we were at church. My mom, beaming with pride, introduced Lily to one of her old friends. "This is my granddaughter," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. It was the moment I realized, people can change, but they only do it when they're forced to confront their mistakes. As I watched Lily walk beside my mom, holding her hand, laughing as they talked about something silly, I leaned over to Sarah and whispered, "Worth it." It wasn't easy, it wasn't quick, but it was real. And in the end, that's all that mattered.